Hi, it's Calvin Niles, the mindful storyteller, and I am delighted to share with you stories of awakening. Each week, I'm going to be talking to people from around the world of various backgrounds and experiences. People I love, I know, and people I admire, but also those who are completely new to me. One thing all my guests will have in common is that they have been through a journey of awakening. By awakening, I mean a call to higher consciousness and deeper self-awareness beyond material reality. These stories will be real, challenging, funny, stimulating, and insightful. We're going to take our good time with these conversations. So listen from your comfy chair with your favorite drink, or on your weekend stroll, your morning routine, or whatever makes you happy. Stories of Awakening with me, Calvin Niles, and I look forward to you tuning in. Hello, and welcome to this very special episode on Stories of Awakening. This episode is special because I'm not going to bring a new guest to you today. We've reached 10 episodes, and I'd like to take an opportunity to stop and reflect on some of the conversations that we've heard so far. While all of my guests have been unique, incredible, and individual people from all around the world with really unique stories, there seems to be a common thread running through many of them that I wanted to explore in this episode as we reflect on the conversations. We started in January of 2022. And one of the things that struck me really early on was how losing a loved one can be incredibly transformative. Not is This is not always the case, of course, but from a point of view of spiritual awakening, it seems to have a really pivotal role to play.
When basically I lost my mother died, and you can imagine it was just a very difficult time. It was the hardest thing that ever happened to me. It was like, oh my God, how does a person even deal with that? It was just very, very difficult.
I didn't even know how to do that because it was, it just, it's one of those things you're like, what do you mean? And the news was broken to me by my husband. And it was one of those moments where you wish you could just turn back time on. You're just like, no, this is not happening.
I had one big moment when I was 8. I had heard of people dying in the village, so death was not unusual to hear of. But at 8, my father suddenly became ill, and within 2 days, he was gone.
I pretty much renounced Catholicism as soon as my mother died, mostly out of anger, just like I don't believe that a loving God would do this. And I had already, in fact, I had quite a strong interest in Native American spirituality, and I'd already sort of decided that there was not a creator God, that there was more like the natural world that we are intimately a part of, and that the spirit kind of runs through everything. So I'd already sort of come to that conclusion. And also, I think what helped with my giving up of Catholicism was the fact that I was also queer. So I felt that I couldn't really stay in that spiritual tradition and be who I was fully and be happy about that. So in a way that kind of made it easy. It was like, there's not enough here that I resonate with or that I feel like comfortable with.
And those were some incredibly moving and powerful excerpts, which really highlights this commonality between many of the people who've come on here and how integral loss has been to their own journey toward awareness of higher consciousness, something greater beyond material reality. It is not always the death of a loved one, though. It may just be grief associated with the death of a circumstance, the death even of a relationship?
So that was at a point going back to 2011, something like that, 2010, 11, something like that. So around 10 years ago now. And unfortunately, I was going through a separation with my wife.
Divorced. I saw, of course, my mom first, widowed. Then my aunt divorced. Then I saw my older siblings, my sisters, in relationships, and I saw all the pain and the crying and the back and the forth. I had one sister who became pregnant at 19 and was so horrified, because in those days you were not supposed to get married, have children out of wedlock. So she was traumatized by that. She ended up giving birth to a son, but died 3 months later with meningitis. So when she died, she was 21. So I'm dealing with all these things, death of my sister. I'm still overcoming death because they were all very close. My father's death. Then my aunt died the following year. Then 6 months later, my sister died. So I was dealing with all that stuff. And those things, emotional roller coasters, just get buried into your cells. It's only now I'm recognizing that because of awakening. So during the time, all those things were buried in my body, but I didn't know.
Those were some incredibly moving examples of loss and grieving those losses, whether that is the death of a loved one or a death of a circumstance or a situation or a relationship. And other people in our lives who we've lost have caused us, in many cases, to question, maybe even to question God and whether God really exists.
I didn't understand what the point of it was. I've been brought up in a Catholic family, and it was always like, you have to go to mass, you have to say your prayers, you have to do these, symbolic gestures, and it was just like, you have to do this because you're part of this community, you're part of this group, but nobody ever explained why. And then I thought, what's the physical or what's the result of me making this movement? What's the point in this movement? What's the point in going to this big building and listening to somebody who isn't even passionate about what they're and I don't want to be disrespectful to the church or anything, but my experience was that I was sitting here as a child listening to some elderly man who had it felt like he had no passion for what he was explaining or reading.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just reciting text. So there was nothing that grasped me about it. There was no interpretation of it. It was just what he was reading. And I just found it really boring. So it kind of made me question the whole concept of church and religion. And I just didn't understand any of it.
I officially became an atheist in that moment, right? It's like my mind just clicked and said, boom, I don't believe there's such a thing. Well, again, I love reading books. So I started researching atheism. And so there's a guy that wrote a book called The God Delusion. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. One of the world's most famous atheists.
Mm-hmm.
So he wrote a book called The God Delusion. I absolutely loved the book. It's a great book. I was like, yeah, I used to have that delusion, right? But it was in my research and digging, that the mind, how the mind works, the brain works, couldn't answer all of my questions. And so once again, as I started feeling better, started putting my life back together without God, it's like, why do I need such a thing?
Something else really coming through for me so far in these conversations is that people began to question their purpose, you know? So the questioning started about, is there a God? Would God do this to me? But, you know, what is my purpose in life? Why am I even here?
I've always questioned why am I on this planet? I feel like I'm here for a reason. I must be here to do something.
Yeah, I was always like I used to remember I used to look at my family and be like, I'm out of here. As soon as I can get out of here, like there is more.
You know what? This isn't for you. There's something much bigger out there that you have to find and that you can figure it out. So I kept jumping from work to work. And then eventually, this was, I think, in 2018, I just decided, you know what, I'm done. I'm done with these 9 to 5s. I need to go out soul searching and figuring out what is this voice that keeps nagging to me and telling me, do something bigger. You have to, because it's out there.
Yeah, well, I guess you might say it probably started at a point where I was at a crisis of purpose in many ways. And I guess the catalyst for that crisis and looking for purpose was a point when I realized I wasn't happy with the way my life was, and perhaps I wasn't on purpose at that point, but it needed a crisis perhaps to shake me up and start to become aware of that.
I don't exactly know what it is, but the best interpretation I have of it is that I'm here to serve in some way. And I'm here to say, let's say, without jumping into Catholicism or anything, I'm here to carry out God's will. But it's like, okay, I need to kind of connect with what that mission is. And then you learn practices and you learn ways to live a good life, you know, and that's kind of your foundation. So you stick to that for a while. And then when you can stick to that, when you build a good foundation and you can stick to it, the rest kind of falls into place. And I'm at the moment sticking to my morals that I've developed, and I'm really like holding on to them tightly, and I can see goodness unfolding in my life as a result of this. So I'm detaching myself from the outcome, and I'm just focusing on the daily practices of living a good life and what it is to be a good human.
So something became very clear after a while in these stories for me. When people stepped into this higher awareness, they began to connect with not just something greater in an abstract sense, but very particular language as spirit guides or angels or some other type of beings that guide them through their lives and connect with them in very interesting ways.
It's almost, people say sometimes, oh, I've got somebody walking over my grave or something like that. And for me, it's a sort of a direct message from people who look after me, who my guides, if you like, angels, whoever you feel is there for you, or maybe, a member of your family who are kind of there and just letting you know that what you're saying and what you're thinking and what you're doing is right. It's like affirmatory. So that has become like an amazing tool for me.
Yeah, so some of them did speak to me, and really kind of offered me wisdom and direction and a comfort, I feel, that really gave me more inspiration to continue with the journey and to go deeper. I think the first one that came that night that I lit the fire actually said that she was my twin flame and she doesn't exist like in this plane. But she said, that she was there to help support me and guide me, and that I could call on her if I ever needed to. And that just kind of offered me some, comfort that I wasn't alone. And I grew up in Michigan, so my family's still there. So I was feeling very isolated here in California at the time. So just knowing, that I did have support with these guides, and I did a vision quest with my Raven guide, and she also spoke to me, and so like actually kind of put her like the top of her head kind of on my head around my third eye and nestled me. And I felt very like that contact, even though it, wasn't necessarily like a physical contact, I could feel it in my body too, that really warmed me and again provided some of that comfort that I wasn't having, in my sort of physical material circumstances.
And finally, one of the really fascinating things that came to light for me in my experience of this series so far is birth. Many women have awakened to a greater purpose through their own maternal instinct, their procreation, their motherhood. Alima talked about this in her own journey. We heard about this in Victoria's story, and we did hear about this in Leonora's story as well, who happens to be my mother, talking about the impact of birth being so integral to their sense of awakening.
Got pregnant when I was 22, and I thought, this is the mindset I was in, I thought I was going to have the baby, put her into daycare as 3 months, as soon as she could, and carry on with my life. But the day I had my daughter, I just looked at her, and most people would be like, that's the most amazing day, and for me it wasn't. I just looked at her and I just burst into tears, like, I'm so sorry. I felt this guilt, like, you've got an awful mum. Like, you haven't made a good choice. Like that, I've been crying out. I just felt awful, like this poor innocent child, she's got me. And that was the real truth of how I felt about myself. I felt like I was not a good person. And that was because of all of that time of how I was leading my life. And then I just had this something, don't know what it was, like come through me and like fill me with this love that I've been missing for so long. And it was just like, oh, okay, like you're being held, like you can do this. It was not even anything that I can say rationally. It was literally just a wake up of my truth, of my heart. And this sort of almost like the dimensions had aligned just for that moment. And it seemed like the path was really clear. And then I was just like, okay, I'm going to do the best that I can do for you.
I followed the growth journey of my daughter, and I think that kind of created something magnificent inside of me, because you read up and you're like, there was nothing a week ago, and now suddenly there's a heartbeat. Where did that come from? And then the more I read, the more I'm just like, yesterday, this thing was the size of a poppy seed. Today, it's the size of an olive. And I literally went and read every week the size that this growing child was. It went from an olive to a prune to a lemon to the size of eventually reaching the size of a watermelon, which was obviously 9 months later. And that, I think, hit me so much, where I was like, whoa, this is huge. There's something, I mean, it's not like we don't know this, right?
Mm.
But when you're going through this as a mother to be,
yeah,
it makes you realize that I'm about to give life. Like I'm about to bring this into the world, and there has to be something insane and magical out there.
It's really God creating through us. It's divine intelligence using us as a vessel to put this into this universe, if you will.
I know that when we talked about the kingdom of heaven, it was not a physical thing. But during the nursing career, I was able to look at the body. I was able to look at conception and how the body was created. And I'm thinking, one moment of intimacy, and then a sperm and an egg came together. You carried it for 9 months. and all of a sudden this new baby arrives. So I'm thinking, who created that in the womb? When it comes out, I said, it's my baby. I claimed it, of course, because the ego loves to claim everything. So I claimed it, it's my baby. But was I able to create a human body in the womb with all these different organs and all these different systems, and all these systems operating independently but yet depend on each other, and creating a balance in the body? So all those things I started looking at and trying to relate it to the spiritual aspect.
So that brings me to the end of this really short reflection of the amazing stories. And thank you to my guests so far for being so generous in their sharing of their stories. And it seems we've come full circle with death and all the way around through to life. And that cycle of death and creation almost being two sides of the same coin, or are certainly present in all of the stories at the same time. So thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. Stay tuned for some more great stories of awakening in our next episode. And I'm looking forward to you tuning in. Bye for now. What is most meaningful for you in 2022? Is it healing and forgiveness? Is it love and belonging? Or maybe it's the courage to be and to act. Soar Book Club has all of this for you. If you want to read more and need accountability to keep you moving forward in your already busy life, are you looking for inspiration to develop your spiritual awareness? Maybe you want to be part of a positive community during these uncertain times, or connect with like-minded people who love stories and books. Then join Soar Book Club. Hop on board. The train is about to leave the station, and I would love to have you on the journey with me. So click the link below to join. That's Soar Book Club with me, Calvin Niles. I hope to see you there.